Our scripture today comes from Isaiah 37. Starting with verse 14, it says this: "This is the message for King Hezekiah of Judah. Don't let your God, in whom you trust, deceive you with promises that Jerusalem will not be captured by the king of Assyria. You know perfectly well what the kings of Assyria have done wherever they have gone. They have completely destroyed everyone who stood in their way. Why should you be any different? Have the gods of other nations rescued them? Such nations as Gozan, Haran." You'll notice none of these are around anymore. You can thank the Assyrians for that. "Rezeph and the people of Eden who were in Tel Assar. My predecessors destroyed them all. What happened to the king of Hamath and the king of Arpad? What happened to the kings of Seraphim, Hena, and Ivish?" After Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers and read it, he went up to the Lord's temple and spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed this prayer before the Lord: "O Lord of heaven's armies, God of Israel, you are enthroned between the mighty cherubim. You alone are God of all the kingdoms of the earth. You alone created the heavens and the earth. Bend down, O Lord, and listen. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. Listen to Sennacherib's words of defiance against the living God. It is true, Lord, that the kings of Assyria have destroyed all these nations, and they have thrown the gods of these nations into the fire and burned them. But of course the Assyrians could destroy them. They weren't gods at all, only idols of wood and stone shaped by human hands. Now, O Lord our God, rescue us from this power. Then all the kingdoms of the earth will know that you alone, O Lord, are God." Cedric Kanana's journey to faith is nothing short of dramatic. He was born in Rwanda to a Muslim sheikh father and a mother who served as both a witch and a priestess. Raised in a blend of Islam and traditional animism, his family groomed him from birth to be a spiritual leader. But civil war and genocide tore his world apart. By age 9, Cedric was surviving on the streets. As a teenager, he numbed his pain with drugs. He started dealing to other students and forced them to convert to Islam if they wanted his supply. Yes, that's very hypocritical, but I guess it worked for him. His aggressive tactics worked so well that he was appointed as the imam of a local school. Then, during a basketball warm-up, he suffered a complete breakdown. He spent nearly a year in a psychiatric hospital fighting what doctors called drug-induced psychosis and what others recognized as intense spiritual oppression. Eventually, a Christian friend invited Cedric to church. The pastor and 4 members stepped in and fasted for him for 7 days. On the final night, Cedric heard the name of Jesus repeatedly. His mind cleared. He felt restored, even though he didn't know Jesus personally yet. Months later, he suddenly collapsed. With no medical explanation, he ended up in palliative care. He was completely paralyzed and couldn't communicate. Eventually, his heart stopped. 12 hours later, his body was being prepped for burial. Without warning, Cedric coughed. He tossed aside his burial sheet and stood up. The people around him scattered in terror. In that exact moment, he saw a vision of Jesus Christ, looked at him and said, "You are among those I died for, so do not deny it anymore. You must tell others." Cedric didn't hesitate. He walked straight to a church while still wearing his burial clothes. That single act of obedience sparked a movement. Despite serious threats from his old community, his testimony brought his family and countless neighbors to Christ. Today, Cedric is an Anglican pastor. His story is a powerful reminder that no matter how far gone your situation seems, you serve a Savior who still wakes the dead. We pick up our series on Isaiah today as we finish Act 1. If you recall, one of the things we learned about the book of Isaiah last week is that it contains 3 different sections. Like any great trilogy, Act 1 introduces the players and sets the stage for what is to come. And as we look at the latter half of this first section, chapters 1 through 39, that this is written before Jerusalem falls. The rest of Isaiah is written after they are taken into exile into Babylon. It stretches over a period of 200 years. In this first section, we find out what Isaiah was saying was going to come. When he told them repeatedly in the decades leading up to this day that we read earlier, when the Assyrian army is camped at the gates, he had been warning Israel for literally decades that if they didn't turn it around, that if they didn't return to God, and if they didn't put aside all of their idolatry and all of the evil that they committed, calling it justice, that God would use a foreign nation as a tool of discipline upon them, and he would break them. Can you imagine waking up that morning? You've read these prophecies. You've heard what Isaiah had to say. It's not hidden. Everybody knows what that crazy old man's talking about all the time. Can you imagine waking up and looking out your window and realizing as the sun is breaking across the horizon that your city is completely encircled by an invading army and you are now under siege? They went to bed hearing rumblings and rumors of war. They wake up and the end has come. They are waking up in their burial clothes. This existential threat that Isaiah has told them and warned them about is now a concrete reality. It's blood and flesh, and it's standing at their door. I often wondered, did they just tune him out? I mean, after they'd heard it 3 or 4 times, was it just background music? How could you heed those warnings and believe in God and not do something to avert what's coming? But what we find is they ignored the warnings and they went about their lives doing the same things that got them there in the first place. You see, Israel didn't take their relationship with God very seriously. They dabbled. They dabbled in it in the same way they dabbled with the pagan gods of the Canaanites that they also worshipped. I mean, they're spreading the chips out over the whole board. They're covering everything, right? Whatever number comes up, they're a winner. And they spread themselves out so thin in the name of religious diversity that they don't believe in anything, really, anymore. So they go through the motions. They still offer sacrifices at the temple. The priests still say the same words. But somewhere along the way, it lost its meaning. And despite warnings from the prophets like Isaiah, they're sleepwalking to their own destruction. But then something interesting happens. Israel gets a great king. It didn't happen very often. In fact, it rarely happened. And this great king goes by the name of Hezekiah. Now, Hezekiah's dad, Ahaz, was exactly what the culture reflected at the time. He worshiped God as the king, and he also made sacrifices to the Baals and to the Canaanite gods. In fact, he will offer one of his own sons, infant sons, to the fires of Molech and have him burned alive as a sacrifice, a human sacrifice. That's the king. That's who's in charge. That's the guy making decisions for the nation. He kind of believes when it's convenient. and doesn't when it's not. But he has a son, and the son is nothing like the father. Hezekiah was a whole different animal. One of the things that's interesting about the Old Testament, especially the books of Kings and Chronicles, is that if you read them, what you'll see is that they have kind of a grading system for all the different kings of Israel. So they're looking back, right? From the kings, from Solomon on, you have this string of kings in both the south and the northern kingdoms. And they get a little blurb, right? They get their picture in the paper, basically, and they get a little caption. And the historians that wrote Chronicles and Kings are going to judge their rule. Were they a good king? Were they not a good king? Why weren't they a good king? What was an example? Why were they a good king? What did they do? And that's kind of the layout. Hezekiah is the top of his class in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. There's not a better king in the entire book than Hezekiah. He immediately, upon taking the thrones, begins to restore Solomon's temple and destroy all of the altars and shrines to the Baal gods. He calls Israel to return to her first love, to return to God, and he leads by example. He has one fatal flaw. We'll get to that in a second. Israel will thrive under his leadership. By this time, the kingdom, the 10 tribes of the north are no more. The Assyrians marched through and separated them like chaff from wheat, moved them all over the empire, and destroyed their cities and their culture, and he ended them. You see, this is what the Assyrians did. Some people are motivated by different things, and the Assyrians were motivated by the worst factor of all. They simply reveled in the destruction of other civilizations. They loved it. Every king in the Assyrian Empire did the same thing. And what we'll see in the story today, Sennacherib is going to basically turn down a bribe just so that he can say, I destroyed all of Israel. Because that's really what got him up in the morning. But Israel under Hezekiah thrives. Isaiah has thrown down the gauntlet, so to speak. He's warned them that God would raise up the Assyrians and use them to discipline Israel for all of their spiritual infidelity and moral decay. Hezekiah and the people have a choice to make, and it's the same choice that we have to make 2,600 years later. Will they trust in God to be their hope and protector? Or will they hedge their bets by surrounding themselves with powerful friends? That's the decision Israel has to make. And it's not an existential decision. The enemy is literally at the gate. And they have to decide, how do we move forward? How is this not our final chapter? How could we continue? And the temptation is to trust in the walls, to trust in the alliances that Hezekiah had crafted. That someone would come riding over the crest of the hill with the sunlight behind them, right? Like in the Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers movie. And here will come an army cascading down to crush the Assyrians. Wouldn't that have been great? That's what they were thinking. Come on, Egypt, when are you going to show? Well, guess what? Egypt is a no-show. That powerful alliance, that powerful friend that Hezekiah allied himself with to protect themselves from exactly this thing, from the Assyrians, Egypt decides it's really not worth their trouble. And they don't want anything to do with the Assyrians. Nobody did. They stayed home. Good allies, right? We too have to respond to God. In whom do we really put our hope and our trust? Who is the guiding light of our lives? Is it our own strength and accomplishments that we trust? You see, one day we too will wake up in our burial clothes. And we too will see Jesus. The question is, will we look ahead to that day with joy or dread? Okay, let's get back to the text. You guys still with me? Okay. The Assyrians are on the move. They've expanded rapidly and are pushing through the Middle East. Jerusalem, however, was a fortress on top of a mountain. It was nearly impregnable. In fact, there was only one way to get there from the valley up to the top of the mountain where Jerusalem sits. One road. All along this road, Hezekiah and the kings before him, when the Assyrian threat started to grow, built fortified cities all along this valley with watchfires. And when one of them would get attacked, they would light the signal fire, and that message would be passed all the way up the line until it reached Jerusalem. One by one, the fires were lit. And one by one, those fortified cities were left in ruins as the Assyrian army made its way up the valley to Jerusalem. They destroyed 46 fortified cities in Judah. Understand the scope of this? This is not war. This is annihilation. The Assyrians don't accept surrender or POWs. Their goal is to end your people. They are genocidal by definition. And now they're here. And we have to decide who we put our trust in. We thought maybe the fortified cities would slow them down. They didn't. So Hezekiah, while King Sennacherib is still at Lachish, sends an envoy, and he basically says, what's it going to take for you to leave us alone? And the King Sennacherib gives him a laundry list of gold and silver and valuables that he wants in return for turning around and leaving Jerusalem intact. The rest of the country is utterly destroyed. So Hezekiah takes everything he's got. In fact, he doesn't have enough gold, so he has to go to the temple. Consider, this is a godly man. How hard this must have been for him. He has to go to the temple and scrape the gold inlay off the doors of the temple, meant to honor and reflect God, so that he can give it to a murderous king. So he sends the gold and silver. Sennacherib gets it in Lachish, and he sends back this answer: I'm coming anyway. And his army continues, marching towards Jerusalem. Bribery didn't work. All that is left of Israel is cooped up in a walled city with the destruction coming, and it seems like there's nothing that's going to save the day. There's nothing. And we've been in situations like that where you felt so hopeless that you can't even imagine a hopeful possibility coming out of the situation. You can't even look for a silver lining because you have been so crushed. You struggle with hopelessness. And that's what they were going through. And they have a choice to make. Will they put their hope in God, or will they put their faith in the strength of their walls and the ability to wait out a siege? One of the things that's really interesting that Hezekiah did, tiny rabbit trail. If you ever get a chance to go to Israel and go to Jerusalem, you got to see this. He dug a tunnel. One of the things Hezekiah did was he sabotaged all the springs around Jerusalem so they'd dry up, and the Assyrians wouldn't know where to get water. I mean, it's a pretty dry place anyway. And water's kind of important in the desert, right? And then they took one of the underground springs that was outside of the city walls, and they put a team there and said, start digging. And then they put another team at the pool of Siloam, where it comes in, where the pool is, and they said, see those guys 533 yards away over the wall? Yeah. Start digging. You'll meet in the middle. 533 yards of tunnel through solid rock. And when they finally came together, they could hear, they knew they were close because they could hear the other teams chiseling and tapping on the stone that they were chiseling and tapping on. And when they broke through, the tunnel is tall enough that a grown person can walk through it. And it usually has about 2 feet of water in it from the pool. And when they came together, they were less than a foot off. No GPS, no survey. Less than a foot off, starting in opposite directions with a vague direction, tunneling through solid rock. Hezekiah was a pretty cool king. And so they had an ace. They knew that Jerusalem could withstand a siege. And it would just come down to who couldn't stand the pain the longest would win. So they've been preparing for this. And even now, their hope is gone. They realize all their preparations were really in vain. This army is unstoppable. For Hezekiah, it's no choice at all. He puts on burlap, the clothing of repentance. And he goes to the temple to worship and beseech God and sends his most trusted advisors to the prophet Isaiah to get Isaiah's read on the situation. And Isaiah tells them, don't worry, that the dreaded Assyrian army wouldn't set 1 foot inside the walls of Jerusalem. Well, that was news they were waiting to hear. And so they go back and they tell Hezekiah. Meanwhile, while this is going on, outside the walls, the primary general of the Assyrian army begins taunting Israel like Goliath taunted the Israelites before David laid him low. Ridiculing the God of Israel and his people. He even mocks them. And best of all, he doesn't do it in Aramaic, which is the language of the aristocracy. He does it in plain old Hebrew, where everybody can hear and everybody can understand. This was a psyop. The Assyrians were the first to effectively use psychological warfare in battle, and they were really good at it. So this guy's doing a psyop on all the people. He knows that if he can convince even a small contingent of them to give up and surrender and hope that maybe they would be spared if they just opened the gates at night, that maybe they could gather some momentum as people got more afraid and they would come out with a white flag and this wouldn't even be a fight. He's setting up Jerusalem for a fall. Listen to what he says. This is what the general says. This is what the great king of Assyria says. He's relaying Sennacherib's words. What are you trusting in that makes you so confident? Do you think that mere words can substitute for military skill and strength? Who are you counting on that you have rebelled against me? On Egypt? If you lean on Egypt, it will be like a reed that splinters beneath your weight and pierces your hand. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is completely unreliable. But perhaps you will say to me, we are trusting in the Lord our God. But isn't he the one who was insulted by Hezekiah? Didn't Hezekiah tear down his shrines and altars and make everyone in Judah and Jerusalem worship only at the altar here in Jerusalem? I'll tell you what. Strike a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you can find that many men to ride them. With your tiny army, how can you think of challenging even the weakest contingent of my master's troops, even with the help of Egypt's chariots and charioteers? What's more, and then this is the kicker. This is the push off the edge for all those people who are sitting on the fence who can hear this. What's more, do you think we have invaded your land without the Lord's direction? The Lord himself told us, attack this land and destroy it. Notice he turns the tables on Hezekiah. What Hezekiah did was religious reforms. He rebuilt the temple. He focused people to stop doing their own worship, kind of on their own thing, in their own way, on a little altar out on a country hill somewhere. He said, no, tear that all down. You are meant to worship in the temple. That's why we built it. So everybody has to come to Jerusalem. And everybody needs to worship Yahweh, and none of these Baal gods and none of these Asherah poles. He tears it all apart. So Hezekiah did them a favor. He turns it on. Isn't Hezekiah the one that made God mad in the first place? Didn't he tear down your God's altars and shrines? This guy's good. He's real good. And the seeds of doubt start to grow. Well, yeah, he did do those things. Maybe this is God's judgment on us. Well, yeah, Isaiah told you for 30 years this was going to happen for judgment. And you wouldn't listen. But now you're listening to this guy? It's like the head of the Iranian media channel. The people of Jerusalem don't fall for it, but you do have to wonder how close they came to doing that very thing. And if they had, there would not be in Israel. They would be like all of these other names that we don't recognize anymore. One more nation crushed under the Assyrian wheel. But God delivers. Instead, they put their hope in God and they get behind Hezekiah and Isaiah. They don't know how, but they know that their only hope is a miraculous rescue by God. It's a Hail Mary and they know it. But they cling to that hope fiercely. Everyone stays cool, nobody opens the gate, and they wait to see what God will do. And they don't have to wait long. You probably heard last week about the college student who burned a cross at one of Chicago's parks. It became a national story, and the media ran with it right off the bat as something obviously racist and immediately claimed that the KKK was alive and well in Chicago. Right? And everybody got real upset because it's a disturbing symbol. It's a very disturbing image. And then they found the guy who did it. He was an Asian college student. And he said, I wasn't burning a cross because I'm racist. I don't hate black people. I was burning the cross because I was protesting MAGA Christians. I put a red MAGA hat on top. Did you guys not see that? And no, nobody saw that because it was the first thing that burned. All they saw was a burning cross. And so the whole city is freaking out, and this guy's like, well, I didn't mean anything by it. I didn't mean to hate black people. I just was trying to hate MAGA Christians. Well, at least he admitted it, said the quiet part out loud. Like so many of these hoaxes that we seem to run into all the time, it turned out to be something else entirely. So, everything's good. Nobody got hurt. Nothing mean was said, except the MAGA Christians that he's protesting by burning a cross, and so it kind of just got swept under the rug and that was it. But it spoke to something which is very true, that we live in a culture that rejects Christianity and ridicules those who have faith. They stand at the gates and mock the very things that we hold most dear. They claim that we are not spiritual beings and that the only thing you can believe is in the material world. Get what you can while you can, because life is short. Should be the motto of our culture. For a few years, A.N. Wilson represented the confident voice of modern unbelief. An Oxford-educated writer and former classmate of the famous atheist Richard Dawkins, Wilson was hostile to Christianity. In 1991, he published Against Religion, arguing that humanity was better off without faith. Religion, he believed, was something serious people should outgrow. But Wilson did not abandon his atheism because of a crisis or a sudden emotional experience. He abandoned it because it no longer made sense. As he read biographies of Christians who had devoted their lives to the poor, the sick, the marginalized, and the forgotten, Wilson began to see a gap between what atheism could explain and what human life actually is. The materialist story could account for biology and behavior, but not for love or beauty, sacrifice or music. It could describe mechanisms, but not meaning. Eventually, Wilson admitted that atheism required too much denial. He wrote that human beings are very much more than collections of meat. Human compassion for one another, he said, along with the languages of love and music, convinced him that people are spiritual beings. He concluded that the religion of the incarnation, asserting that God made humanity in his image and continually restores humanity in his image, is simply true. As a working blueprint for life, it fits. That word fits is crucial. Christianity did not strike Wilson as a comforting fantasy, but as the most coherent explanation of the world as it actually exists. In 2009, he stunned the intellectual world by writing an essay titled, "Why I Believe Again." Wilson shows that sometimes you come to Jesus not by abandoning thought, but by thinking too deeply to have enough faith to believe that matter is all there is. What do we say to a culture that says, if you're a Christian, you're a bigot? That if you say you follow Jesus, that you harbor hate in your heart against this group or that group or whatever? How do we respond to that? King Sennacherib nailed it in his little letter. He says, words are meaningless. What matters is action. He was talking about military action. But he's right. How do we respond to a culture that says those things about Christians, that parodies Christians as Bumpkusses and Ned Flanders on The Simpsons? We respond by action. We have to show the people closest to us that that lie is not true. That we aren't bigots, racists, full of hate in our hearts because we love Jesus. In fact, that's probably why we're not. And they just got it backwards. All right, these taunts go on for a couple of days, and then in the night, God shows up. He sweeps through the enemy camp, killing 185,000 soldiers. Do you understand why the handful of people in Jerusalem thought the end had come? Could you imagine looking out from a hilltop over 185,000 soldiers? And those are the ones that died. That wasn't all of them. It was just most of them. The rest, including the king, in the morning decided maybe Jerusalem wasn't worth it, packed up and left. 185,000 corpses, and not one Israelite among them. But the story doesn't end there. Jerusalem is saved, of course. But it doesn't end there. Sennacherib returns to Nineveh, where he's later killed by two of his sons while he's worshiping in his pagan temple. Just like Isaiah foretold all those years ago. And you would have thought, really, you would have thought that Hezekiah had learned his lesson. Not to put faith in political alliances, but to put the faith in the God who watches over Israel instead. To be faithful to him, not an ally. How quickly Hezekiah forgets. He's a great king. Israel is rebuilt. The nation begins to thrive again. The Assyrians are no more. They are in rapid decline because there's a new rising power coming up in the Middle East. The city of Babylon. The Babylonians will destroy all of the Assyrian Empire, absorb it into their own, and 100 years after what happens to Hezekiah, they will be on the doorstep of Jerusalem and they will be the army waiting to sack Jerusalem. And here's what happens. They send a delegation 100 years before that to Hezekiah. And Hezekiah, he loves a good alliance, loves him a good partnership. And these guys are on the rise. So he takes this entourage of diplomats through all the palace and the temple, and he shows them everything, including all the vast treasure that had been recovered. And they said, really? What a lovely little town you have here. And they went back to Babylon and said, guys, gather around. You know, there's a city on top of a hill in the middle of nowhere that is just loaded. We ought to hit that. next time we run through the Middle East. And they do. And the Babylonians will carry all that's left of Israel into exile and return them to Babylon. And Jerusalem, what God had defended miraculously 100 years before, Jerusalem will fall. And you know why? Because Hezekiah was gone. And the kings that followed him just went right back to their old habits. They didn't learn. One thing that's interesting is that archaeologists uncovered Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, at the height of its power. And in Nineveh, in the excavation, they found both the temple and Sennacherib's palace. And one of the things the Assyrians loved to do, they weren't the only ones, but they loved this, was they liked to record all of their wins like a glass case in a high school, right? Like your Hall of Fame. Like that's what they did, but they etched each battle and victory and conquest onto stone and then put it on the wall, recording all their great victories. In fact, when they found the stela, one of the reasons they knew that it was tied to Sennacherib was he is quoted on this piece of stone as saying, I have Hezekiah trapped in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. And then the next line says, and we returned with 800 pounds of silver and gold from Jerusalem. And that's all they say. No mention of an army that was decimated. That didn't make it into their Hall of Fame speech, the one they lost. I find that interesting that the biblical account fills in the gap. Up to that point, the two narratives read identically. The only difference is the ending. And the losers just left that part out. Didn't look good. Was not a good look for Sennacherib, right? Which to me makes the Hebrew version of events all the more believable. Here's the thing. The God we serve is the same God who delivered Israel from the Assyrians and the same God who delivers us still today. He's the God who takes all of our weaknesses, all of our mistakes, all of our broken promises and spiritual infidelity, and he weaves them into a life of mercy and love. This notion that we picked up somewhere that God's not interested in you unless you're all cleaned up and on your best behavior is insane. That is not why Jesus goes to the cross, so that we could be better people. Jesus goes to the cross so that we could be reborn, that we could be made new. That hearts that at one time only carried out the letter of the law now passionately want to see the fruit and the fullness of the heart of the law applied in compassion and grace and mercy and justice. Today, the question from Sennacherib remains. Who will you put your trust in to deliver you? When the storms are raging, who will you believe? I can't answer that one for you. I can answer for me. But it's one that you're going to have to answer for yourself. Amen?